to think it all began on a laptop in my dining room, and that it's still on a laptop in my dining room. Did I have any idea it would make its way to the Short Swing Film Fest? No, that festival probably collectively spends more money screening any one film than the entire budget of this one was. This whole setup is just me. All of the film's visual effects were done by me alone and no one else, not out of hubris or anything. I really couldn't afford to hire anybody else, so this film's entire post crew is an army of one, being me. Every single massively complicated, intricate visual effect was done by hand, frame by frame, at a snail's pace by one person. And that person is me. And that has been somewhat discouraging throughout every step of this process because all of it was done by me. On my last film, I did 17 different jobs, and on this one, I did 10. Part of that is a budget thing, but honestly, most of that is that there isn't really anybody else I could hire, not nearby anyway. There isn't a strong or developed film community out here in Ohio, so I'm basically always on my own whenever I make one of these. It's been kind of exhausting. In fact, I almost died at one point while working on this film. I was just really taking on a lot of work for one person, and that workload was constant and demanding to the point I literally almost worked myself to death. There's just so much work to do in post-production for this one, and that's not a lack of planning or anything. That's just the inherent nature of this film's script and its visual effects. It's not that they're expensive or beyond my skill, it's that they take a lot of time to make, especially if you're doing it alone. COVID, admittedly, hasn't helped things, and that's why just the motion tracking alone took 7 months, which is insane considering the entire film isn't even 12 minutes long. Even though we shot it in, I think, March of 2019, it's only now just coming out 3 years later because things have just been delayed and set back so much. It takes about 1 week to complete the visual effects for just one shot, and that's including every time we cut back to it. So that requires a lot of patience, You're not typically seeing these massive amounts of progress when you're working that way as just one person. So motivating yourself to keep going is additionally difficult. But I managed to do it, and one day suddenly woke up and the visual effects were completed. And generally speaking, they looked great. With this film, I feel like it's the first time I accomplished exactly what I set out to do, right? My original starting vision for this film was translated exactly to the screen. And I'm proud of that. But it took a lot of work to get there. And it all starts with just one shot. And repeat. At the beginning of the visual effects timeline, I compiled every shot that would require motion tracking for the entire film. I grouped them by things like, were they close-ups or wide shots? Were they handheld or static camera? Were they moving or non-moving? Then I scheduled the timeline by difficulty, right? I started with some easy shots so I'd have a chance to get familiar with some of the newer tools I was going to use. Then I'd work my way up to more difficult shots. Then I'd work my way back down to easier shots near the end because I knew I'd be exhausted from the harder ones. So I decided to do those ones earlier when I had more energy and save the ones requiring less energy for the end. Every single shot starts with animating keyframes. These mean the frames that the rest are going to be modeled after. So with each shot, I first created the first frame of animation and the last frame of animation. Then each shot goes from 16s to 8s to 4s to 2s until finally reaching 1s, which just means every frame has been animated. I want to say we did this process with just over 60 shots, and though they were all tedious, most of them lasted between 5 to 7 seconds, so ultimately I could generally complete one every hour or so. However, there was one particular shot, which I was dreading because I knew it would take more work and more time than any other single shot of this entire film. I literally had nightmares about working on this shot because this shot was daring. This particular shot is a single, unbroken, 4-minute long take. I genuinely considered cutting it. I figured I'm already exhausted, and this is going to require 1,000 times as much energy and work as I've thus far spent on the entire film combined. I might have to compromise on my vision and just accept that it can't be accomplished this time around. I had purposely put this shot at the halfway point in the pipeline because I had promised myself that if I successfully pulled this shot off, that I would be past the point of no return and finish this film. So then the day came, and it was every bit as terrifying as I'd feared it would be because I quickly realized this shot alone would take 3 months. To this day, I still don't really understand how I pulled it off. This shot should have been way above my level of experience or skill. The biggest obstacle being it's completely silhouetted against a window. That made trying to motion track the sunglasses nearly impossible because most of the time their lenses weren't even visible. Thankfully, we had designed an infrared work filter at the beginning of the process to put over any shots where it was too dark to see the lenses, so that we could see them well enough to track them, then switch the filter back to normal at the end. So we essentially did this with a 4-minute long take. In the end, we stopped doing the splitting method. This wasn't like trying to line up frames a mere second apart like we'd been doing. This was trying to line up frames entire minutes apart. So instead, I just did the first frame and started working forwards, slowly knocking out increments of more and more frames with no end in sight. Until one day, suddenly, it was done. Then I played it back, and to my complete astonishment, it was great. In fact, it was the greatest shot I'd ever accomplished as a filmmaker. Not just because it was the most difficult, but because it was the most daring and the most bold. Instead of playing it safe because of my budget and scale, I actually did something that would be a massive undertaking even on a well-funded film, and without even a fraction of their resources. I pulled it off in stunning quality. Honestly, this is a selfish concern because it's the least important thing going on in the world right now. But I'm honestly afraid that no matter how much work went into it and no matter how good it is from any objective standpoint, nobody will even notice. Like, it'll just go overlooked under all the noise of everything going on in the world right now and be forgotten even in years to come. time isn't really a friend of independent films anymore, so if they don't make an impact on a rival, they're basically never seen by anybody. And considering the massive undertaking that making this film's visual effects was, it would be such a waste to just end up as another indie film buried under all the doom scrolling, and then that's its entire legacy. I really hope, if nothing else, it just achieves more than that, because this cast and crew is really one of the best I've ever worked with. They really made something special. They made something that was more than forgettable. So I would hate for it to amount to that. Their work just kind of be forgotten.